All right, there's a few more people joining. I'll slowly get started, and then hopefully if there's some more people that want to join, they'll join in a few minutes. But I'm already going to get started. Welcome everyone to build your own connector on the Data Hub. It's a quick high-level session that I'm going to be giving for how to create your own connector for the Opinum Data Hub. If there's any questions during the presentation, I have reserved some time at the end because we have quite a bit to get through. So I'm going to try to go through it. Of course, you can put your questions in the chat, and if it's a quick question, I can answer it in the moment. But if there are bigger questions or slightly more technical questions, maybe I have some time set aside at the end so I can answer those. So who am I? Well, I am Koen Van Kerckhoven. I am a software engineer and developer at Sentigrate. You could also contact me at that email address, koen@sentigrate.com. And at Opinum, or for Opinum, I've created several connectors. Now, what are connectors? I'll get back into that a little bit more by the end of this session. But very, very briefly, they're kind of the connection in between third-party APIs and the Opinum API. So I'm assuming most of you already will know what you can do with Opinum, what you can do on the dashboard, what you can do on the Data Hub, how you can visualize your data, how you can do some predictions maybe with it, how you can do some calculations with it. And some of you may also know that there's an API, or an advanced programming interface, that you can use to push new data into the Opinum dashboard. Now, there's also these kind of APIs, so advanced programming interfaces, for different companies. Energy companies, water companies, utility companies, any kind of, there's many, many different types of APIs that your clients could use, or you could use yourself for your clients or on behalf of your clients, to pull data from utility companies and push them into Opinum so that you have them all on the Data Hub as one general source, that you have them all as one general format so that you can visualize them in similar ways. You can do predictions on them, you can do calculations on them in a similar way. So maybe some examples to show of what I mean by third-party APIs, right? So I worked on, I have to do this every time and then I think it's fine, right? There we go, okay. It's a little bit weird, but it seems to work. So I did some work on the Fedora API. So Fedora, I will quickly show where, this is a screenshot of the website. I'm not actually gonna go to the website itself, but Fedora is mainly an energy company, mostly active, I think, in the Netherlands, but maybe also in Belgium and some other regions around there in Europe. And they offer, as part of their service, they offer an API that you, as a client or as a company having many, many Fedora devices, you can use to access the data for all of these Fedora devices and Fedora installations. Now, what I did is what I'm also going to show you that I did with the other high-level, with other third-party APIs. There's going to be some high-level documentation of these companies where they try to explain, oh, this is how we store our data, this is how we make it available to our customers, this is how we make it available to our partners and everything. They will have some kind of high-level documentation probably on that. And they might have a much more technical documentation on their API interface and how you can fetch data from them, maybe even push your own data to their data storage, and how you can experiment with that. Maybe they have like a sandbox environment even that you could experiment with. And based on this documentation that you can take a look at for any company that you want to partner with. So this is an example, right? But there's many companies that will offer something similar. And you can request the more technical documentation, or you can request some more high-level documentation to see what kind of data they would offer, how time granular can you get the data, right? Can you get the data just for a day level, or can you get it on a minute basis, or maybe even seconds or something? What kind of data streams do you actually want to extract? Because maybe not all of the information that they offer for their clients is relevant for you or for your clients. So you can look at it into all of these. Also, how do you authorize the transfer of this data? Do they have some system in place already that you can fetch this data from them and that you can store it in Opinum and do other calculations with it? So in the Fedora example, They have a so I apologize. This is in Dutch, but this is all they have because they're a Dutch company. They have an implementation guidebook for their web service that explain a lot of, in high level detail that they have. They have a bunch of data, mainly energy data for their utility meters, and they go into some detail. And I had to look into this document a little bit to see, okay, well, what kind of data are they offering? Are there different kinds of data available based on the different hardware utility meters that are installed with people? Is there some kind of bigger scale solution where I can say, I don't want to sum up all the different meters one by one and get the data from every single one separately, but I want all of the meters for this, linked contract or something. So some high level documentation for how they do this. And they also have a more technical documentation for what they make available. In this case, they have a Swagger file that they've put online, which I can also show in a second, which I've made just a quick summary of here. So they have some data storage, some database or something similar to that, where they store all of their utility meter data for their clients or people that are using their services, their hardware. They offer a protected API that you can interact with to fetch data from these different utility meters. In this case, they have what's called aansluitingen, connections or meters or something to that effect that you can look at. So you can look at all the aansluitingen or all the connections or meters for a certain contract based on a specific EAN code. If you have that, you can even look at a specific connection or meter. And then each one of those will have channels. And based on a specifically chosen channel ID, you can then look at the time series of data. So, data for this morning at 6 a.m., 6:05, 6:10, 6:15, and so on and so on. And also the individual data points for that same channel ID. So where did I get this summary from? So the technical documentation that they have, I'm going to see how I can do this. Can I overlay it here? It should work, right? There we go. You guys can see this, I think. So they have this Swagger file. This is just publicly online. Of course, they might not advertise it very quickly, but most of the time, if you ask the company, hey, we want to do this connector for Opinum, we want to fetch our data, and now we're clients with you, or we have clients that we represent that have Fedora devices. We would like to get some access to your technical documentation. They will probably have something similar to this. In the examples that I have today, they all have Swagger documentation. Even Opinum actually does. And so they have these aansluitingen or meters, right, I guess. So you can ask for, hey, what are all the meters, the connections for this authorization that I have access to, right? So you might have the authorization to a single client or a group of clients. Maybe in this case, it's always for single clients. Can you give me a list of all the meters that they have? And then you have a list of all the different EANs. And based on those EANs, you can request all the different channels for that specific EAN that you want to select. And then those channels, based on choosing a channel for a specific EAN meter, you can look at time series or data points. So you can say, for example, give me all of the data for, in this case, the time series ever since this timestamp, for example, right? So give me all the data beginning in August for the whole month of August or something. Or give me all the data points, but aggregated on a daily basis for the same period, right? And you can get data in different formats and everything. And there might be some limits. So in the, if I go back to the presentation here, there might be some limits on what they allow you to do. So in this instance, this example of Fedora, there were some limitations on how long ago you can fetch the data, right? But that will mostly be described either in the technical documentation or in some document, more high-level documentation that they will have for this. So this is an example. I'll quickly get back to this later on, but just to give you an idea, right? So third-party API will have some kind of data somewhere in a database or something similar in files or whatever for their clients, for utility meters, gas, water, electricity, whatever it might be. or it might even be at specific people's homes, right? So it might be smart meters and everything, and you can fetch them through fetch that data through some sort of API that they offer you control over based on some login details, some user authorization that you might have for those people. Another example is SMA. SMA is, I think, a German company that are mostly handling in solar energy inverters and products and energy meters and stuff like that. So again, the same thing, they will have some kind of high-level documentation. In this instance, they did also have some high-level documentation. They had, in this case, actually, in SME's case, they have two different third-party APIs. They have one that is for free, I think, or well, like included with the cost of whatever you pay as a client for their products. And they have one that you can pay extra for that has more features, more functionality. Again, looking what is the data that you actually want or that your clients actually want from this API. Do they just want to know, oh, how much energy did my solar panels gather today? Or if I look at the instantaneous power that my solar panels are generating right at this moment, is it expected because of the weather or whatever, right? So like you can use it to look at the health of your installation. You can use it to look for leaks in case of a gas or a water utility meter. You can use it to look at performance if you have a huge solar farm and you have a bunch of these meters and you want to see how is my daily profit evolving based on what I would expect to get from this investment, stuff like that. So in this SMA example, like I said, there was some high-level documentation and also some technical documentation, but actually in this case for two different APIs. So this was the simplest one that they have that I think is either included in most of their products at least, or otherwise very, very cheap at least, included with their products. They have some data storage of some kind. There's an API that they have put in front of it with some kind of authentication, and you can get the data for what they call plants. This could be, one person's home. It could be an apartment building with a bunch of meters, or it could be like a solar plant field full of like solar panels, right? And based on the plant ID that you might then have, if you have access to the data for that plant ID, you can then get the PV generation or photovoltaic generation, what they call a measurement set type. It's a little bit of a detail that's not very important, but so just the basic case is that you can just get access for plants and only a very specific type of data for that plant. So if I overlay this here, so the technical documentation that they have, here for the basic reporting API. So again, this is a Swagger file in this instance. It doesn't have to be. Probably it will be because this is a pretty good standard. You can list all the plans that are available for this user. So you have the authentication for a given user, or maybe for a group of users, right, for a group of clients. And you can ask, okay, what are all the plans that are linked to this account? And then for each of them, you can ask, give me the PV generation for a given period. So give me the daily values for the last month or 7 days or something, right? Or give me the yearly values for the last 2 years or whatever it might be. And then it has some extra information on case of this data that's coming out of this. For example, if you say day or week, give me the daily or the weekly values, then these are power values and they're in watts. They're not in kilowatts or in whatever. And then for months and years, they're actually energy values. They're not power values. So they're not instantaneous, but they're accumulated right values. And they will be in the unit watt hours. So these kind of details are important to look at in this stage before you're actually designing and implementing the connector already. Let me think, right? So if I go back here, you should be able to see the presentation again. There we go. So this was the basic example, but SMA also had a more complicated and that you also have to pay extra for, an API with multiple options, with more options, with more functionality. So they have presumably similar data storage hidden somewhere behind a protected API. And you can fetch for, you can ask for a list of plans for a given user authentication that you have. You can ask them for that specific plant ID, give me there's two different measurement set types in this instance. Like I said, there's more features available because this is a more expanded API. Or you can also say this plant, it has devices. Oh, my bad, go back. It has devices, and based on devices, you can ask for 8 different measurement set types. So you can either say, give me the plant level, right? So what the basic API was, and then you're stuck to one type of data that you can get out of it. In this case, it was daily and weekly instantaneous watt, so power value, sorry. And in case that you say, give me the monthly or the yearly values, then they will be in energy and it will be watt hours, and you don't have any other way of getting the data out. Now, in this case, because it's more expanded functionality, you can actually go on device level. So if you have an apartment building with 10 different utility meters, or you have a solar farm with 10 different zones or 5 different zones or whatever, you can access on a device level these measurements, this data. Let me show you that as well, real brief. This here, so this was the basic one, and then the more expanded functionality one, you have there's actually even more, but I'm not going to go into it because otherwise it's definitely going to take too long. But so you have plants, and based on a plant ID, you can already ask for I'm trying to find it now, but so you can ask on device level, you can ask for their measurements, and the different type of measurement sets here for a given period, you can see is much more, right? So in the other case, in the basic API case, it was only one. You didn't really have a choice. But in this case, you can ask for the energy and power of the battery that might be included, the power consumption, the power that's coming in and that's going out, the photovoltaic power alone, the energy mix, the AC power, and so on and so on. And you also have more choices in how time related this data is coming out that you want to use. Let me transition back to this, if it will let me. There we go. All right, so that's a quick summary of third-party APIs and the kind of things that you need to keep in the back of your mind when you want to create one or want to commission one to be implemented. That there can be a lot of difference, as you saw, right? There can be a lot of difference in how this basic API looks compared to how, from the same company, the more expanded API looks, and also compared to how the API of a completely different company and their hardware will look. So that has to be taken into account. Let me skip ahead here to the Opinum API. I'm not going to go very deep into this, but so the Opinum API basically allows you to push data to the Opinum dashboard. That's very briefly, that's it. There's many different ways of doing it. Very basic way is that you create a new source, you add variables to that source, and then you just push data to those variables in a programmatic way. An example of how the connector that I'm going to go into in a second interacts between these two parts. So you have the third-party API, which is somewhere in the cloud, it might be in a different country, whatever, and this is the Opinum hosted connector example. Based on some time-based triggers, it might fetch data from the third-party API every hour or every 2 hours or every day or whatever you would like, and store that in the Opinum storage system with a mapping config to remember how data was fetched from this third-party API. And this data can then be displayed on the data hub. And it can be mixed with data from other sources, so you can visualize it, compare it, and everything. There's also definitely an option to do this self-hosted, right? So you can yourself on-premise or host it in the cloud yourself or something, have some kind of storage system. You can fetch data from the third-party API yourself based on some kind of events that happen, based on time-based triggers, whatever you would like. And after your connector can fetch all this data and maintain it somewhere yourself, in order to see it on the data hub, of course, you still have to push it to data hub, in this case through the Opinum API. All right, so that was very brief. But so now, the connector. Very fundamentally, the connector does these 4 steps. I'm going to show them. I should have put these in a different order, I guess. These 4 steps. So the connector just links and retrieves data from a third party. It creates sources on Opinum Data Hub. It creates variables for that source. And then it pushes the data that was fetched from the third-party API to Data Hub in the correct format that is expected by Opinum. And so there's some transformation going on. You know, there's a few things in between, but fundamentally this is what is happening. And so if I go back, here we go. All right, there's a bunch of documentation available on Opinum itself, so docs.opinum.com. There's a lot of more high-level and also very technical documentation, even on how all these things can be done. And I should note, most of these steps, actually all of these steps, can be done manually. So I could go behind my computer and I can fetch the data from a third-party API myself. I can store it in a file on my computer. I can transform it so that it's in the Opinum format that's expected, and I can push it to Opinum Data Hub. And I can, make some sources either on the website, or I can even make those sources through command line as well. All that the connector is really doing is automating this process as much as possible. So it's taking care of all of these steps in a user-friendly way that is as automated and can run 24/7, or in whatever time-based way you would want as much as possible. I'm gonna click here. There we go. All right, so I'll show a quick demo. So I'm not sure if any of you have already seen this. For the people that haven't had access yet to Opinum Data, you maybe haven't seen this. But if you go on Data Hub, there's these things where you can add new sources. And inside this red marked area, what's inside of it will be the front end, or the user-friendly facing side of a connector. And there's many different connectors already live on the production website, actually. I'm going to show you an example. Let me see. So I'm on here. That's where I am. So if you say, I'm going to add, oh yeah, so I'm probably logged out because I've been talking too long. There we go. So I'm logged back in. So if I add a source, so a site, I haven't really gone into this, but this is like a physical location so that you can separate data into different physical locations if you would want. For this example, I just created a demo site. And so I want the Fedora connector, right? So you can either create a custom source yourself, or you can use one of the connectors that are made available by Opinum themselves. And based on, in this case, demo account, login information, entering that will give me access to these meters, right? So if I go back to the Fedora example, remember they had these things called aansluitingen, and that's translated here as meters or connections, kind of, right? So selecting one connector will show me, okay, well, this account has these meters, and if you select this meter, you can select these different channels. You can select all of them. You can only select, for example, these 3. I will select this one as well, and then you can save it. So what will happen if I click save here is it will create a new source for the site that I've selected earlier that you can't see, with this account information for the Fedora third-party API, with this meter selected and these channels selected for that meter. So if I quickly go here to the Swagger, that will mean that this EAN is that meter number here, this 8716 and so on, right? And the channel IDs that I select are all the different channel IDs that you can see here. So saving it in this way will create 4 variables in this case: this variable, this variable, this variable, and this variable. It will create them all in one source. It will make this one the default variable because it's marked as default. And I think it will, I'm not going to save it now because it's a demo location, but it will already start fetching data for that location immediately. And then I think the default is once every 2 hours or something. And so there's another example that I could have shown, but I'm already starting to run out of time and I still have some things to say. So fundamentally, right, that's what a connector is doing. It's just automating that process instead of you having to download all of this stuff from the third-party API in files yourself, or like, CSVs that you have to download or something. You just have to choose some things from a drop-down here. You just have to say, I want this meter, I want this connection, I want this plant, I want this device, whatever it might be, and I would like this channel, I would like these variables, I would like this data format, I would like these data streams, and you can select them and it will create everything and bundle everything for you. And then in a very similar way to if you would just add variables yourself on the website, it will create those sources for you, the source for you, create those variables, add them into the source, and then you can see them as if it was just a normal source that you've created yourself. So that's the power of the connector. I can go into some more technical detail on how some of this works. I can answer some questions if people have any questions about how all of this works. And yeah, I think that's maybe best. I'll pause a little bit to see if there's people that have any questions. And if there's not many questions at all, then I can continue a little bit with some slightly more technical things. I think there's also a roundtable that has started a few minutes ago, so feel free to go to that roundtable if you were planning to go to the, I think it's the French roundtable, right, Alison, if I'm correct in saying that? So are there any questions on, well, how to build your own connector, anything that I've said, anything that I've shown? And if there isn't, then for the people that are still here, I will just continue and show some of the slightly more technical stuff. I have a few more minutes, 5 to 10 more minutes, I think, that I can use. So I'm going to use it to go into more detail for this fedora example. Let me go back real quick to the fedora example, right? So I have to fix it like this, I guess. There we go. So in the fedora example, let me go to this one here, the summary. We had aansluitingen, or connections, or meters, I think is what we eventually called it. Meters based on one specific AEN. When you choose this specific meter, the one with this AEN, has different channels. And when you select one of those channels, you can then get the time series data for that channel, for that EAN, for that user, right? So let me show you what that looks like slightly more technically. So this is this connector that has been hosted on the Opinum site. So it's not a self-hosted one that we have hosted. It's one on Opinum, which makes some things much easier, and it actually mostly makes things easier, which is very nice. Let me go into this maybe first. This will be easiest to show. So there's some credential stuff going on that's not very relevant, but there's, when you're setting up your connector, obviously you need to take care of that credential stuff first. But there's some different functions here for all the possibilities of the third-party API. In this case, for the Fedora API, you can get meters, which is just, get me a list of these Fedora meters for a specific chosen EAN meter, get me a list of those channels. And I'll get back to that question in a second. You can access the different channels for this specific EAN, and then you can get either the time series or the data points based on a chosen meter AN and channel ID. Right? So going really quickly back, and then I'll answer the question to this slide right here. Is it gonna show? Okay, good. Right, so you have aansluitingen, in this case called it meters, and then you can select with an EAN, and you can choose different channels, and you can, based on a selected channel ID, you can get the time series or the data points. So how do you host your connector? Is there any documentation on the topic? So there's many different ways that you can host your connector. One of the ways is just to partner with Opinum and have it hosted in their ecosystem, although I'm not sure if they do that very often. We're doing it mainly because there's big utility companies that would like a partnership where the data can be shared easily between the two. You can also just host it yourself. I mean, it can be as simple as hosting it yourself on your computer with just like a public IP address. You can host it in the cloud somewhere. All it needs to be able to do fundamentally is connect. If I quickly skip here to this, right? So all it needs to be able to do, so this bigger block here, the bigger square with rounded edges block, would be the connector. And it can be hosted in the cloud. You can host it on Google Cloud Services or on Microsoft Azure or on Amazon Web Services, or you can host it on something like even GoDaddy or whatever. Doesn't really matter where you want to host it. All it needs to be able to do though is fetch data from this third-party API that you want the data from, and push that data to the Opinum API. Right? You can optionally, you can also store it yourself if you would like to store it for yourself for any reason. And on hosting itself, that's actually kind of the one part that you have to decide yourself, right? So am I gonna host it in the cloud somewhere? Am I gonna get a physical server rack? Or we have in our company, in the basement, there's a bunch of different server racks. Can we host it ourselves on there somehow? Those are all definitely possibilities. And I am just quickly gonna show you where I have it here on the docs.opinum.com. There is some information on, it might be API. It's probably API, right? So if you look at the API integration, you can look here, there's a bunch of information on this docs.opinum.com website on how you can push data to Opinum. Right, so this is documentation on how you use the standard format API, where you can push data in this way. And it has some extra information on how everything is supposed to be formatted and everything. I'm gonna see, right, so there's some more detailed, for example, if you, oh, that's a little bit awkward, there we go, variable. Right, so if you want to get the data that's already available, maybe in Opinum before you push more data, you can see it here. If you push others, probably it's data, not variable, of course. Or is it not data? Oh, I'll have to. I would have to see. I thought it was data, or a data pusher, probably, right? So yeah. So you can push data using either a data pusher or there might be another way to do it as well. But so there's definitely documentation on the Opinum side for how you can push data to Opinum. And there's definitely going to be documentation of some kind of the third-party API, right? So of how's their data formatted, where do you get it, and stuff like that. But yeah, this is the part that you either have to decide yourself, or you can use, of course, the existing connectors that are already made for some bigger partners that Opinum already has. I think if I look on the production website, these ones are definitely already available. So Azure IoT Hub, you can already use the connector for Fedora, SMAPI, Siemens, and so on. Right, you can use these. And I think there's at least a few more in the works as well that are not yet available, but will be soon, including, like I was talking about, SMA. There will be 2 different connectors made available, one for the basic one and one for the more advanced one. And how do you register it in Opinum if you do self-host it? Yeah, I think I've answered that, right? But yeah, good. If you have any other questions, you can continue to post them in the chat. So I'm just going to quickly return to this. We don't have that much more time, but I'm just going to show you, right? So however you decide to, I have to do it like this. Yeah. However you decide to implement it, at the very least, you will have to implement some way to fetch data from your third-party API. In this case, the time series was most relevant for Fedora. So to fetch all of that data. And also, you will need to create everything to create a new source. I'll just skip, right? So creating a new source. There's some extra checks and everything, right? But fundamentally, what it's just doing is it's creating what's called a gateway, and then a source with this specific information for Fedora. So with an EAN, with a site ID, with some specific things that are specific to Opinum, where you say, okay, it's made for this kind of connector and everything, and then it can create the variables. In the case of Fedora here, it's based on the channels, right? So if you have multiple channels that you've selected that you would like the data for, then it will create multiple variables. It will create all of those variables and link them to your source, and that's been created above. So that's what happens in the, can I do this? There we go. Let me skip here. That's what happens in the first step and the second and the third, kind of. So you link and retrieve all of this data, you create the sources, and you create variables. That's all stuff that kind of happens before any data is actually retrieved, right? There might be some checks here so that you don't accidentally create a source for something that isn't going to contain any data, right? If there's some kind of test utility meter that doesn't have any data, there's no point in trying to add it, of course. But so the three first steps here is what I just showed in the code. There's many different, you can do it in many different programming languages. You can host it on many different cloud hosting platforms or host it yourself physically somewhere. And the second part is then pushing that data to Data Hub. Now, in the case of the connectors that I'm showing here, the Fedora connector, it's a little bit easier because the connector itself, so this code and where it runs, it's already hosted at Opinum, at the Data Hub. So, close this. So when, in this case, timing triggers are sent every 2 hours, for example, or every hour or something to retrieve new data, then based on everything that you've selected as a user, right? Remember that I showed, I would like this meter with this EAN, I would like these 4 channels, and I want to make this one the default one. It will check if there is new data, if you're actually authorized to get data for there, and if you are, then it will see, okay, well, what's the last time that you did fetch data, and so on and so on. And then it will use this Fedora client that contains all the logic to fetch data from Fedora specifically, fetch all of those data points, and then insert them, there we go, insert them into Opinum API. Of course, this step would be slightly different if you have a self-hosted or on-premise connector. You wouldn't be able to get the, how should I say, maybe like trigger. You wouldn't be able to get the trigger from Opinum necessarily. You would have to set something up yourself that every hour or every day or every week or whenever you want the new data, that it runs this code somehow. And you would have to send it through an API call. And you wouldn't be able to just store it directly in the database like it's being done here. But fundamentally, they both do the same thing, right? So the first 3 steps will be, in this pipeline, will be almost exactly the same. And then the last step will be slightly different based on existing connectors that are already on Opinum, or if you would like to self-host one. Good. That's kind of everything from my side. So unless there are any questions, I would say I have a lot of fun for the networking session that's still going on, I think, at least until 4:30 or something like that, right? For the rest of the event. I hope you guys had a great event as well. You can contact me at koen@sentigrate.com if you'd like to. Right, so we have a technical partnership with Opinum. Sentigrate has a technical partnership with Opinum for the creation of these, for example, these connectors. But they're more for Opinum hosted stuff. But we do have some experience with it. So if you're looking into, okay, I'm not sure if it's going to be worth it or not to have Opinum host something very specially, but I want to try it out for like a month or something to see what this would look like if we create a connector ourselves, feel free to contact me. All right. Yeah, unless there's any other questions, I would say have a great rest of the day.